Major developers of retirement properties are lobbying hard to be exempt from a law that would get rid of ground rents on new properties. Currently, buyers of most retirement houses and apartments pay hundreds of pounds a year in ground rent. The government's announced it will change the law in England to get rid of ground rents on new homes. But the major developers of retirement housing warn that would drive up prices and mean fewer properties would be built. Tony Bonsignore has been investigating.
It's important to say from the start, Paul, that this crackdown on leasehold charges didn't start in the retirement end of the market. It started when significant numbers of more typical home buyers were finding, to their horror, that their purchase contracts included leases which allowed for dramatic future increases in ground rents. In one case, for example, the ground rent doubled every 10 years, going from around £300 to nearly £10,000 by 2060, making that property unsellable. And it was stories like this that prompted the government to take action. Now, the big retirement house builders do charge ground rents, but there are no nasty surprises like that in their leases. The two biggest developers, McCarthy Stone and Churchill Retirement Living, usually sell properties with ground rents of a few £100s a year on top of service charges and other fees. Many of those rents will go up in the future, but only by a much more modest amount. But, as things stand, the retirement market will be included in the proposed ban. Rosemary from Chichester bought her retirement property from Churchill 10 years ago after a difficult period in her life.
I lost my husband 2008 and I had a complete breakdown. My sister came really and rescued me, and I was with her for the next 9 months.
Later that year, and still reeling from her husband's death, Rosemary paid £236,000 for a one-bedroom apartment in her Churchill development. She told me she loves living in the apartment, and it has helped her to get over her husband's death. But
we pay £655 a year, and we get absolutely nothing for it. Nothing at all.
You did know about this charge, though, when you bought the apartment?
Yes, and I knew there would be a ground rent. I knew it was leasehold, but I didn't know that it was anything like the charge that it is. You know, we're elderly people, we're pensioners.
Well, on Moneybox previously, we've covered the cases of retirement apartment owners who found the resale value of their homes is way below the price they originally paid. Now, there may be many reasons for this, but some owners believe these ground rent charges are one of the factors which put off buyers. Rosemary's one of them. She had her property valued last year.
The valuation of my flat was actually £150,000. Not 235, which is what I paid 10 years ago. And it's an incredible loss to take.
Why do you think the value has gone down then?
One of the reasons is, I think, the high ground rents. As you go on, the value of the property gets less and less, and you're giving more and more to the companies that are demanding it.
Rosemary talking about her Churchill retirement living apartment there. They and the other big player in this field, McCarthy Stone, say these leases are an important part of their business model. They sell them off to investors, allowing them to offset the cost of paying for communal areas in these apartment blocks. Now, it was around a year ago that the government promised to effectively ban ground rents on new homes and flats. It wasn't clear at the time if retirement homes would be included in that ban. But in December, the government suggested that the ban would apply to all properties, including retirement homes. A final decision is expected soon. McCarthy Stone and Churchill are now lobbying hard for an exemption from that ban. Sebastian O'Kelly is from the campaign group Better Retirement Housing, which has long argued for an end to ground rents on all properties.
Well, how can they possibly have an exemption from the ground rent ban? If these properties were sold to buyers who needed mortgages, in many cases they would be ineligible for mortgages because the ground rents are higher than 0.1%. That's the first point. Second point is, what are ground rents for? If they're for no defined services and are wrong in the wider housing market, how can the retirement housing sector claim an exemption? Ground rents are either for a service or they're not for a service, and if they're not, which they aren't, then they should go.
Were this ban to cover all retirement homes as well as other sorts of properties, what do you think the effect would be on the retirement home industry?
The interesting new companies which are coming into this sector don't believe in this model. The problem is with the volume house builders who've depended on ground rents in the past. They say their business model doesn't work if ground rents are taken out. Our view is change your model.
And that was Sebastian O'Kelly. Clive Fenton is the chief executive of McCarthy Stone, the UK's largest retirement house builder.
For us in the retirement industry, ground rents are very important because we provide a significant amount of shared services within the developments, which have to be paid for. There's something like 30% of the space in our developments is non-saleable. Things like lounges, kitchens, dining rooms, house managers' offices, mobility scooter stores. And it's roughly double what you'd expect in a normal block of apartments. So we use the ground rent income to pay for those, and it stops us having to put the prices up of our apartments.
But it's not an income, is it? Because you sell the ground rents on to an investor.
Yeah, no, absolutely, we do. And the reason we do that is because we're developers. We're not investors. Our responsibility is to develop more homes for people. If that asset is on our balance sheet, clearly it's cash tied up that we can't use. So we sell that to an institutional investor. They use the income to fund their pension scheme obligations, and they provide us with the cash which we are able to reinvest back in buying more land and providing more developments.
So how much do you sell a ground rent of, say, £500 for?
Our developments on average consist of 40 apartments. When we sell that on, you would think in terms of, say, £600,000 that we would receive at that point, and that £600,000...
That's about £15,000 per apartment.
Yes, exactly. And when you think that the cost of providing our communal spaces in our developments is something between £1 and £2 million, this is actually a part of the receipt that we receive that helps to fund that.
Wouldn't it be fairer just to add that to the price so they pay the cost of all those facilities, the extra space that you provide for them?
I don't know about it being fairer, but actually all the research we've carried out says that our customers would much rather pay an annual ground rent at a relatively small level compared to the cost that we'd have to put onto the price of an apartment of £15,000.
But isn't that because your properties are sold above market price anyway?
There's a small premium, but not very much, frankly, in terms of the payment of this. So this is just a small charge which goes on top, and it's very transparent. We communicate it to our customers, and they know exactly what they're paying.
Research last year found that the average McCarthy Stone home sold for 17% less when it was sold second-hand.
Well, we've been tracking the value of our properties sold over the last 5 years, and we've looked at every property that's sold in the last 5 years that we manage ourselves, which we've been doing since 2010, and the value of those properties on average has increased in 75% of the cases.
So why should the government exempt retirement builders from this general ban on ground rents for future development?
The issue is for the government is in the event that we are included in that ban, then we can't pass the price of that on to our customers. So the only option we have is to reduce the amount that we can pay for our land. If we reduce the amount that we pay for our land, we will simply buy less land and produce less apartments for the market.
So it's a blackmail really of the government. You're saying if you make us bear this cost, we'll build less retirement housing.
It honestly is not blackmail. I mean, it's just a sheer fact, and you can see that already in our numbers. Our land acquisition has reduced by 1/3 since the announcement of the government on 21st of December.
But would it matter? You only expect to sell 2,100 odd this year. And there's 1.5 million retired people, I think, want to downsize. You're insignificant in the market.
Well, we think there's something like 4.5 million people in the UK that would actually consider downsizing.
Well, that makes you even more insignificant.
And there's only ever been 161,000 retirement homes ever produced for sale. So
it's a broken model, isn't it? People don't want it. They don't want to pay ground rent. They don't want to pay big service charges. And they don't want to pay more than you could buy an ordinary flat for locally on the open market.
I mean, we don't think it is a broken model. The problem is that there's been no government support for our sector compared to the first-time buyer market. And we've been working hard, all us and all the other retirement house builders have been working very hard to try and increase our output. We were seeking to grow our business to around 3,000 homes per annum. Over time, that would be a significant input into the market. And this is just making it significantly more difficult for us.
The government hasn't made any indication it's willing to exempt you. What will happen if it doesn't?
Yeah, I would imagine that our ability to buy land will reduce, and that will mean less supply. And obviously the corollary of that is we will end up employing less people.
Clive Fenton, Chief Executive of McCarthy Stone. And just to be clear, Rosemary, who we heard from earlier in that piece, is a resident in a retirement living apartment from Churchill, the other big developer in the field, not a McCarthy Stone property. And Tony, what was Churchill's response to what Rosemary said?
Well, Churchill told me, Paul, that they're sorry to hear about Rosemary's concerns, but the ground rent terms are made clear to all customers as part of the sale process. They also said that whilst they support the government's aim to stamp out unfair leases and punitive ground rents, charging a reasonable ground rent on fair terms is vital for the retirement housing sector. As they say, it helps fund the extensive communal areas that are so important in these types of developments.
Thanks very much, Tony.